Hey, it's Jack from Jack Gately Real Estate and the Online Real Estate Academy. In this episode of Ask Jack, we're going to talk about lead paint. I got some great questions here, so let's just dive right into it. Excuse me. This email starts off with, "This was too long to put into the chat box." And it was a little bit long, but great questions and definitely worthy of a video. So let's get started. You've got questions, I've got answers. So number one, if a buyer needs to be compliant, who is actually paying for the deletting? The seller, right? Well, first off, the seller can choose to delet their property or bring it into compliance prior to putting it on the market. They can choose to do that. It's a choice that they want or don't want to make, entirely up to them. But whenever a child under 6 resides in the property, it must be brought into compliance within 90 days. So in a lot of markets, that obligation falls upon the buyer / new owner. So if the new buyer has a 15-year-old child, then there's no legal requirement to bring it into compliance. It only kicks in when there's a child under 6. And then they must delet, as we said, within 90 days of their residency. Number 2, if you know there are year-round rental properties that are not deletted, do you not show them to anyone? A couple of double negatives there, I think. I understand the question. And the answer is you must show all the properties that meet the tenant's parameters, for number of bedrooms, price, that type of thing, regardless whether they're deletted or not deletted, and regardless of whether they have a child under 6 or not. If you're cherry picking apartments to show based upon whether the tenant has a child under 6, you're very likely committing a fair housing violation. You don't want to do that. So show them everything based upon their parameters. Now, if they volunteer to you, and if they did this, I would strongly recommend that you get them to email this instruction to you or something like that. No text messages. That's another video, but don't do business in text message, especially for important stuff. If they don't want to see apartments that have not been brought into compliance, then I guess that's their choice. And you could, in that way, you can not show them the undeletted, so to speak, but only if it's a tenant choice, and I would definitely get that in writing. Otherwise, it's fair housing kind of, you're headed in that direction. On the lead paint paperwork, if all parties say don't know, doesn't that kind of kick the can down the road, and isn't that immoral? Oh, I love that question. That's a good question. So it does kind of kick the can down the road a little bit. If the seller says, I don't know if there's any lead paint, it does kind of kick the, ignorance is bliss is kind of how it is. On the other hand, the lead paint law does not kick in, as we mentioned, until you have a child under 6 residing, because that's the science. And so that's what it is. Could you say could you say that something's legal but yet not immoral? I don't know, but if the seller says they don't know, almost always the buyer will have the opportunity, and this is, I think, the important part here. The buyer almost always has a 10-day opportunity to test for lead paint, which I would strongly recommend you do if the property was built before 1978 and if you have a child under 6. Okay, last question. In the, I'm going to use my Boston accent here, Piers versus Wheeler and Taylor case, if the seller and agent verbally told the buyer that the house was deletted, what did the paperwork actually say? Well, in that particular case, and I'm glad you asked this question, there was no paperwork. They didn't complete the paperwork. And so that was a major contention in that particular case. how do I want to say this? I believe, and I haven't seen the paperwork, but I believe that the paperwork also said that the property was deletted. But as we know, and this actually just came up in my office. As we know, just because it was gutted doesn't mean it's deletted or brought into compliance. It can only be brought into compliance if it's actually tested by a authorized / licensed lead paint test inspector, and only then, when the inspector gives it the stamp of approval, and there's an official document, only then can it be considered brought into compliance. Just simply gutting it does not suffice. Great question. I think there's a follow-up here. I assume that the note said don't let them, it must have was their lead. Whenever you get a note, so in this case, Pierce versus Whaler and Taylor, there's this famous note that the agent sends to the buyer, and the agent writes, "Don't let this scare you." Whenever you read those words, it should scare you, right? It should scare you. When the nurse says, "This is not gonna," when she sticks the needle in, "This is not gonna hurt," it always hurts, right? All right. Hey, I hope those questions and answers help you out. Thank you so much for asking them. That's it for this edition of Ask Jack. I'm Jack from Jack Gately Real Estate and the Online Real Estate Academy. Have a great day. Bye-bye.